Now, aviation is a big talking point today. Ryanair has said it may shed up to 3,000 jobs as it restructures to cope with the coronavirus pandemic. It said the posts under threat were mainly pilot and cabin crew jobs, and that remaining staff would all take a 20% pay cut. Boss Michael O'Leary, whose pay was cut by 50% for April and May, has now agreed to extend this 50% pay cut for the remainder of the financial year to March 2021. He spoke to BBC Breakfast earlier.
The situation we face now is we've carried almost no passengers for the last 3 months. We carried less than 140,000 passengers in April, May and June against originally the budget was 42 million passengers. For the full year, we'll now carry less than 100 million passengers. The original budget was 155 million passengers. So we will carry only about a third less passengers than we originally planned this year. And, while we expect to be back flying some services in July and August, we think, that the build-up will be slow. Passengers will be wearing face masks, temperature checks at airports. There will be those kind of controls. So we're cutting that. We announced this morning we're going to cut 15% of our staff. That's, we think, the minimum we need just to survive the next 12 months. If a vaccine is found, then clearly the recovery will be stronger. If a vaccine isn't found, we may have to announce more cuts and deeper cuts into the future. And we feel we have no choice this morning but to announce 3,000 job cuts. That's about 15% of our workforce. We will be closing some bases in the UK and Spain and other places across Europe, because by the time we get out of this, we'll be into the winter schedule anyway. And it's going to be very difficult.
Michael O'Leary. Meanwhile, London's Heathrow Airport, normally the busiest in Europe, has said it expects passenger numbers to have fallen by 97% in April as demand slumped amid the pandemic. With me now to discuss the questions posed for the aviation industry and for travellers are aviation consultant Doug McLean, and I'm also joined by freelance travel journalist Alison Rice. Doug and Alison, thank you very much. Lots to talk about today on this subject. Broadly, first of all, Doug, clearly some of the biggest names in the industry in some difficulty. How are airlines going to get flying again, and how many will actually be able to get through this pandemic?
Well, that's a $64 million question, I suppose. Nobody really knows this at the moment. The airlines have had, as you've just heard Michael O'Leary say, 3 months to digest what's happening, and now they're moving into action to actually cut their costs. They've been leaking and hemorrhaging cash for months now, as have lots of aviation businesses. It's not just airlines, it's every business that's associated with airlines. So there's a long road to go, and it does very much depend on what the long-term outcome is. Do we have a way of coping with this, or do we have to live with the virus? I think that what we're seeing just now is just the beginning. There'll be many more cuts of airlines, of routes and bases.
Which brings me, Alison, to what the boss of Heathrow was saying in an interview with the BBC this morning, as people speculate about how airline travel might actually look for passengers. He said that social distancing on public transport, including airplanes, just isn't practical, and that there needs to be, I'll quote him, a reciprocal consistency right across the globe, a common international standard so that people can travel with confidence. This is in terms of health screening at airports and so forth. Do you see that as a way forward?
I think it's the only way forward, because if you social distance on planes, as Michael O'Leary is very quick to point out, you cannot make a profit if you don't fill the planes. And the World Travel and Tourism Council recently came out with a report asking for common international standards and pointing out that most countries will want health checks before you get on the plane, health checks when you get off the plane, which will probably make your check-in time about 4 hours. Optimists are talking about revenge travel, mainly young people having been locked down for how long, wanting to travel. I think that's very optimistic, but certainly if they try and get abroad, they'll find that the holiday industry is nothing like the halcyon pre-pandemic days that we so much took for granted. I mean,
do you think, though, for travellers, it is going to end up being more expensive, whatever happens? Obviously, Michael O'Leary, as you said, look, if there are empty seats on planes to allow social distancing, then the passengers who are there will still have to pay for all of those seats. So will it be more expensive?
Yes, definitely. I think some of the less popular routes will be axed. I mean, overall, globally, there is talk of over 75 million jobs going in tourism, because it's not just, as we've heard earlier, it's not just the airlines, it's the airports, it's the accommodation providers, it's the attractions. How are they going to manage self-distancing? How are they going to manage cleaning? Portugal's is going to bring in a stamp for accommodation providers, a clean and safe stamp, guaranteeing that they deep cleanse the place. The Balearics, Mallorca, Menorca, Ibiza, the places we all like to go to holiday, they're talking of a very gradual return to tourism, only a quarter of the numbers late August. And they're saying they will probably ban the British from going this year because we were so late in instigating lockdown.
Let's just get back to Doug now. Doug, Lufthansa pilots yesterday said that they were prepared to take a pay cut of up to 45% for 2 years to safeguard the future of the group. The CEO saying, it's losing €1 million an hour. Here we have BA, we have Ryanair, we have Virgin. Richard Branson, that's still not sorted out whether he will get some help from the taxpayer effectively here. What do you think is going to happen to all of these big name carriers?
Well, I think when you see British Airways and Lufthansa and Ryanair, you have the full spectrum there of aviation in Europe and probably across the world, the models of airlines that operate across the world. I mean, Lufthansa are talking about voluntary administration. This is not a small problem that's going to go away very soon. And behind that, the airplane manufacturers, they're already cutting production by anything up to a quarter at the moment. And as Michael O'Leary says, depending on what happens, there may well be further cuts next year.
But will state help ultimately be needed, Doug, for some of these airlines? Do you think that is ultimately what might happen?
I'm sure, like any industry, the industry will be absolutely looking for the state to help. But it will be like any industry. So the choices are going to have to be made. Do we invest in health? Do we invest in transport? Do we invest in people having small businesses around the world? This is a huge, huge problem. And one of the big issues that the UK has just been said. We've got a very poor record in this pandemic and the way that we've acted. We're about to cut ourselves off from Europe. 27 other countries in Europe which will have a standard, and we must have a standard when we start to fly again. We must have an agreement that says if you want to fly from this country to this country, then these are the standards that you apply for your passengers, because otherwise the countries will simply refuse to have us.
Which is something that Alison was talking about a second ago. And absolutely. Alison, ultimately, I'm sure both of you would agree, this future relationship between travellers and those they would choose to travel with has to be about confidence. And it's going to take a while, isn't it, for travellers potentially, unless you're one of those revenge travellers you're talking about who's going to get out there no matter what. They've got to be confident that the airlines they fly with, however they choose to get around, that they will be able to transport them safely from A to B. And that may take time, mightn't it?
I think it'll take a lot of time. I don't think we'll get back to the travel industry that we sort of recognised from the old days for 2 or 3 years, if that. I mean, it should be really good news for holidays in this country, but bear in mind that people like, places like Cornwall and Wales have spent the last few weeks telling us not to go there. So they too are going to have to worry about deep cleaning the accommodation, how they self-distance at attractions. So the whole of the travel industry, not just our holidays abroad, our holidays in this country, are going to be, I think, quite deeply affected.
OK, Doug McLean, aviation expert, and Alison Rice, travel journalist, thank you both very much for your thoughts on this today.